Hello, I'm Frances Wolf, First Lady of Pennsylvania. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, giving women the right to vote, was ratified 100 years ago on August 26, 1920. Pennsylvania played a very important role in the suffrage movement. The Commonwealth was the seventh state to ratify the 19th Amendment, just 20 days after it cleared Congress, and 14 months before the final state ratified it. Today, I join 4 of Pennsylvania's women cabinet secretaries to celebrate the centennial of women's suffrage. I'd like to welcome Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar, Secretary of Human Services TERESA Miller, Secretary of Transportation Yasmin Gramian, and Insurance Commissioner Jessica Altman. Welcome all. Especially, I'd like to welcome our very, very special guest, suffragist CARRIE CHAPMAN, CATT, who has stepped straight out of the history books to talk to us today about the tremendous sacrifices that she and her fellow suffragists endured to achieve women's right to vote. CARRIE, I must say, for a woman born in 1859, which is 161 years ago, you look like you're in the best of health. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me come here today, by the way. I understand that some of you have expressed an interest in hearing a little bit about myself and my life story. So if you're interested, I will just plunge right in. I was born in Wisconsin in 1859, as you have shared with us, and my family moved to Iowa, where my parents had a farm. I helped. I paid my own way through college, graduated at the top of my class, became a teacher and a superintendent of schools, and I was in Mason City when I met and married Leo Chapman, a newspaperman who sadly, tragically, died of typhoid fever a few years later. At that time, I began working for local suffrage organizations, moved up to the state suffrage groups, and came to the conclusion that the vote for women would become my life's mission. Susan B. Anthony, who was president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, later asked me to head up their organizational committee at NAWSA, which is my nickname for the group, NAWSA. Soon, I hit the campaign trail, traveling all over the West, Midwest, South, giving speeches. A friendship with George CATT, a bridge builder, led to marriage, but not before he told me his work kept him too busy to travel around with me. But he promised that in our life together, he would be glad to work for 2 if I would reform for 2. That was our happy arrangement. I continued campaigning in the states and lobbied at the federal level and learned a lot about politics. When Susan B. Anthony retired in 1900, she handpicked me to be her successor. But after 4 years, George became ill and I had to resign in order to take care of him, and other family tragedies followed. I went to Europe to recover, got involved in world suffrage and co-founded the International Women's Suffrage Alliance. And while I was there, things stalled at NAWSA. And some of the new members wanted a little more action and formed a small splinter group demanding more action, and they had militant plans. I came back in 1915, and my winning plan immediately re-energized the whole national organization. It was our intent to follow a slightly different path, but let's face it, any great movement takes all kinds of strategies and tactics to win a war, like votes for women. And it all worked out pretty well when the 19th Amendment was adopted. From that time, I took NAWSA in a new direction with the League of Women Voters, which made it possible to become educated voters in an organization which opened to all regardless of race or religious belief, and is nonpartisan. So you can join the party of your choice and still be a member. To finish up, these days, my plans involve working for children's rights, international peace, and a better world for our children and our children's children. Thank you. Oh, Mrs. Wolf,
Yes.
I'd like to ask you a question about your life story. I hear you grew up traveling all across the globe, spending parts of your childhood in Iran, Germany, France, Pakistan, England. I helped found the International Women's Suffrage Alliance. We dreamed of a world in which all women had the right to vote. What did your experiences around the world teach you about the importance of suffrage and democracy?
One of the things that I observed in growing up and living abroad is that the people of other countries have in the past have and continue to pay very close attention to what goes on in America. They pay very close attention to how we put into practice the values that we talk about all the time, the ones that are very much a part of our national DNA, the right and the ability of every citizen to vote. These principles, these values of freedom of expression, freedom to participate, and freedom as equals are quite extraordinary. And I think a lot of people abroad see them as, appreciate them as being quite extraordinary. And for a long time, other countries have looked to us as an example with great admiration and with respect. CARRIE, in your day, women officials in government were a rarity. Today, Pennsylvania's cabinet has 7 women secretaries, including the 4 secretaries who are with us today. They stand on the foundation built by you and the other suffragists because the vote gave women a path to participation in public life.
Actually, as Secretary of State and the Commonwealth's chief election official, I oversee elections in Pennsylvania, so I have a special interest in suffrage. Can you tell us about the suffrage movement in the United States and explain why it took so long for women to finally get the vote 132 years after the United States Constitution was ratified?
Honestly, yes. Even though the fight for women's suffrage is generally set in 1848, when Elizabeth Cady Stanton called the Women's Convention up in Seneca Falls, New York, women had been talking about women's rights for a long time. I mean, back to the time Abigail Adams said to John, "Remember the ladies." But at last, in 1919, the suffrage struggle came to a vote in Congress and was ratified by 36 states a year later, winning by 1 vote. Talk about hair-raising. But on August 26th, 1920, after a 72-year quest for a federal amendment to the United States Constitution, votes for women became a reality with the 19th Amendment. I'd like to invite you to join me. I think you will know what to do when you hear the first word. Ready? Hip, hip, hooray!
Hooray! Hooray!
And now, Secretary Bookbar, I would like to ask you what Pennsylvania is doing to build on the suffragists' success and to make voting more equitable for all eligible voters.
Well, thank you, first of all, for all you did to lay the groundwork for us. And I'm very happy to say that under Governor Wolf's administration, we've made it a huge priority to keep making voting more and more accessible. So just in the last couple of years, about 2 years ago, every county in this Commonwealth upgraded their voting systems over the last few years to the highest standards of security and accessibility for all eligible voters. Every single county has those for all voters across the Commonwealth now. Second, in the fall of last year, a historic bipartisan bill passed called Act 77, which created more voting reforms for Pennsylvanians than we've seen in the last 80 years, thanks to bipartisan support. One of these, thank goodness, included the fact that all Pennsylvanians can now vote by mail for any reason or no reason at all. The timing, of course, couldn't have been better with COVID-19 hitting. Pennsylvanians can now all vote securely and safely from their own homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also implemented an online application so people can go onto their computers, which you may be familiar with, and you can do so in English or Spanish. And voters who speak other language can also get interpreter services by calling our toll-free number. We additionally have just announced that we're providing prepaid postage so everyone can return their ballots for free in Pennsylvania in November. And Act 77 also now provides in-person early mail-in voting that allows every voter to vote before Election Day by going in person to their county election offices. I think the suffragists would be very proud that we've made voting more convenient, more accessible, and more secure, thanks to the foundations that they laid for us. So thank you again for all your work.
I'd like to say, votes for women and men. I hope we all turn out.
I'm with you 100%.
Hi, Carrie. As Pennsylvania's Secretary of Human Services, protecting families is a part of my mission. Our mothers and grandmothers were probably among the first women to vote in 1920. What was that like for them? And did the public support women's suffrage and the first women voters?
What was it like? Hard, distressing, discouraging. I mean, people were only just coming out of the mentality of women's place being in the home, raising a family, being the spiritual and moral guide for their children, and providing a respite for husbands who worked all day. Little mention was made of the fact that a housewife's work was exhausting and unpaid, but the hierarchy was set, and the vast majority would agree that women did have power, but in the home, in the woman's sphere. Of course, there were women who did not have families, and women whose economic situation made it easier for them to work for the cause. Some men agreed that women should have equal rights, but most felt threatened by the possibility. Nevertheless, women of every stripe turned out to work for the vote in spite of the difficulties, because for them, as I like to say, it was an idea whose time had come. What do you say? Let's do it one more time, ladies. Ready? Hip, hip, hooray! Thank you. I guess now it's my turn to ask a question. Secretary Miller, how does the Department of Human Services work to help women's access across Pennsylvania?
So DHS, or the Department of Human Services, we serve more than 3 million Pennsylvanians through programs that help people access healthcare, keep food on the table, pay bills, and access quality childcare. We administer a cash assistance program called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, that primarily helps low-income single moms. It's a federal program, and there is a requirement that participants work or engage in a job training program. But many of these moms are living in deep poverty. And when we looked at the outcomes data for this program, we found that when participants got a job, they often didn't stay in it and just returned right back to the program. That's not okay. And we had to do better for women to help everyone who's served by these programs really get ahead. It's really fundamentally an economic justice issue. In the beginning of 2019, we set out to redesign our employment and training programs to take an individualized approach that prioritizes a person's goals and interests and helps address barriers they face to reaching those goals. Things like obtaining job training and certifications, securing reliable childcare, accessing transportation to and from work or training, and feeling supported along the way. Changes to our employment and training program for TANF participants just took effect in July. And given the economic challenges we currently face, this is needed now more than ever. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this program helps mothers who just want to take care of their kids and help their family get ahead. They face so many barriers and challenges, and this approach hopefully will give them the support that they deserve.
Thank you, Secretary, for all that you are doing on behalf of women every day. You know, Carrie, as Insurance Commissioner, I am particularly curious about Philadelphia suffragette Caroline Katzenstein, who, after suffrage was achieved, went on to become a successful insurance agent, an advocate for equal pay for women and the Equal Rights Amendment. What can you tell us about her and other leading suffragettes in Pennsylvania?
Caroline Katzenstein, she was a remarkable publicist. She worked not only for the National American Woman Suffrage Association, but also for the Equal Franchise Society and the National Women's Party. She advocated, as you said, for equal rights, the Equal Rights Amendment, in fact, and helped female teachers to lobby for equal pay. She wrote a book about suffrage. It was called Lifting the Curtain. What a title. She responded as a statistics expert in state and national suffrage campaigns. And after the passage of women's rights, she went on to become an executive in the insurance business, I guess an executive. You may know better than I. But she wasn't the only impressive woman in the Pennsylvania campaign for the vote, as we all know. I have before me a long, long list of women who campaigned for the vote in Pennsylvania, each of whom deserves recognition for their efforts to win. Commissioner Altman, I have a question for you.
Sure.
As Pennsylvania's insurance commissioner, can you share how voting directly impacts health insurance in America?
Sure, and let me thank you first, Carrie, for just telling us about so many wonderful women in whose footsteps we are certainly walking today. For me, as the Commonwealth's Chief Regulator of Insurance, I have two primary roles, to implement laws and to enforce those laws. And I can tell you that those laws matter. When you vote, you play a role in choosing our leaders, and it is those same leaders who will shape those laws. In fact, women in the United States make approximately 80% of the healthcare decisions for their families. And yet just a decade ago, they often went without coverage themselves and were discriminated against by our healthcare system simply because of their gender. One law, the Affordable Care Act, that I might add, was passed under the leadership of a president who would not have been elected at all if only men had voted, changed all of that. The ACA is the most important advancement in women's healthcare since 1965. It increased coverage for women, lowered the cost of healthcare for women, and is improving the quality of healthcare that women receive still to this day. The ACA prohibited insurance plans from charging women higher premiums simply because they are women, and guaranteed coverage of preventive services such as birth control, mammograms, and cervical cancer screenings at no cost to the women that need them. And at a time when healthcare is front of mind, yet too many Americans may lose coverage, it is the ACA that's providing the safety net so that people will have access to insurance coverage no matter what their employment status is and no matter what their health history has been. So that is why voting matters, why every person's vote matters, and why every person having a vote matters. Particularly today, let's celebrate women in that regard.
Jessica, thank you so much. What a great story and what a huge progress. Carrie, as the Secretary of PennDOT, I have a natural interest in transportation and travel. Can you tell us the story of the Justice Bell and its journey to all 67 counties to support women's suffrage?
I certainly would love to do that. A woman named Catherine Ruschenberger, a suffrage supporter from Stratford, Pennsylvania in Chester County, had an idea, and she had the money to make her idea a reality. It was this, a bell, like the Liberty Bell. But unlike that famous icon, which recognized the beginning of our democracy, this one would be celebrating our democracy's completion with votes for women. It was engraved with the words, "Establish justice," and it would be called the Justice Bell. When it was completed, two women, Jenny Rossing from Allegheny County and Catherine Ruschenberger's niece, Catherine Wentworth from the eastern part of the state, joined forces and spearheaded the 5,000-mile whistle-stop tour across the state of Pennsylvania in 1914 to round up votes for the referendum for women's suffrage in Pennsylvania. They coordinated thousands of members who helped in various stops throughout the state's 67 counties, giving each speech special emphasis to make sure that they were talking to the interests of the people who lived in cities as well as rural areas. It took 4 months, and even though Pennsylvania ultimately lost the referendum to put suffrage into the state constitution, but people were energized by the Justice Bell, which ended its tour at Independence Hall, where Catherine Wentworth rang the bell for the first time on September 25th, 1920. In my day, transportation was a male-dominated field. I bet it still is. How did our experiences in a male-dominated industry shape who you are?
You're absolutely right. It still is to an extent. I was so fortunate to have a family and support system who valued my education and opportunities for me. I will never forget being the only girl in many of my college classes in Michigan. That's where I went to school. It didn't bother me when I was in school, but my presence in transportation was more noticeable as my career grew. As women, we sometimes question ourselves or overanalyze our actions, especially when you're the only one in the room. I had to mold my way of thinking, so the drive and the motivation and the passion that got me where I was would continue to lead the way for me in the future. We have so far to go in many industries, especially transportation, in expanding opportunities for women, and not just for women, but for that matter, a more diversified and well-represented workforce. Similar to the suffrage movement, we have to know that we belong at the table and own that opportunity. At the same time, I'm conscious that people are looking to me and other women in leadership position. It's a responsibility, but everything I do, I'm doing it for my daughter and young girls who are interested in transportation.
I'd like to add something very quickly, because you made me think back to my college years when I joined the Literary Society, turned up the first day, ready to give my talk, when the president of the group said, "Now, Carrie, I want you to look around and pick the boy you want to read your essay for you." Since the topic was women's rights, I said, "I'm very sorry, but I can't have somebody read my essay. I want to do it myself." And they gave me a chance. I don't think they expected much, but it must have impressed them in the end, because they changed the rules. And girls from that point forward were able to deliver their own speeches.
Thank you all for giving such an informative overview of the suffrage movement and sharing with us what it was like to fight for the vote. Thank you, Carrie. You and the other suffragists are truly admirable role models for women today. Is there anything else that you would like to ask of us?
Oh, I'm just so happy that people remember and are celebrating the 100th anniversary of our great victory. I'd like to ask you, as prominent Pennsylvania women in the 21st century, what does suffrage mean to you today?
Suffrage is the process of ensuring that each of us not only has the ability to vote, but to know that the process for each of us, for us as women of any community, is safe and secure, and that each of our votes counts and it will be counted. It is that no group or any community of citizens is left out. You know, women as a group, different cultural communities. I think it's important that we know that all are welcome, and we're welcome as citizens and participants in our legislative process.
Building in what I said before, it's so critical that women have examples of success. For me, the suffrage movement broke the most basic glass ceiling, and to have the right to be counted as an equal. Seeing women break glass ceilings paves the way for women like me. I came from a culture where many women experience gender discrimination. Again, as I said, I was fortunate to have a supportive family and mentors to guide the way for me. They helped me dream and fueled my drive. But I learned that there are plenty of challenges in America too, even a century after the suffragettes won their battle. Dreams are still buried. So it's up to us. Every day I'm trying to be an example for little girls or those who experience discrimination. You might be the first one trying to break the ceiling that you're bumping up against, but do it anyway. And I keep on telling my daughter the same thing. The fight for equality may never be over, but it's a good fight. It's still going, but nothing will change unless you keep going.
I love that so much, Secretary. You know, CARRIE, to me, suffrage means hope, and it gives me hope because it means that I know that while there are so many things that we have to fix and make progress on in our country, that the people who care most about and are most impacted by those issues have the power to vote to make sure their elected officials can represent those same priorities in office. You know, young people can vote for their future and the future of the world by caring about climate change. People of color and members of other underrepresented groups can vote knowing that equity and criminal justice reforms are necessary. Women can vote to further the possibilities for our own children by prioritizing education and economic opportunity. And knowing that all of those people will be at the ballot box, and you all better be at the ballot box this year, gives me hope that we're going to elect a diverse group of individuals who will lead the change that we really need in this country.
Suffrage and voting for me is an opportunity to use my voice to advocate for myself, my family, and my community. When we vote, we advocate not just for ourselves, but for our entire community. Our vote is an act of voicing what type of world we want to live in and what opportunities we want for ourselves and those around us. Our country was built on equal representation, justice, and opportunity for all. But it took perseverance and advocacy from many through the abolition movement, Reconstruction, women's suffrage, and the civil rights movement to truly realize those values. And that fight, as we've been talking about today, it continues today. Without suffrage for all, we cannot have a truly representative process. That right has not always been guaranteed for everyone. We cannot take the right to vote for granted, and we must participate in this process for ourselves, our loved ones, and our community as a whole.
It's great to hear from all of you, and your engagement, your passion, your commitment is just so inspiring. CARRIE, you know, when the suffragists set their sights on suffrage, they understood that voting is the fundamental right of a citizen in a democracy. Susan B. Anthony called it the pivotal right. I take this personally as chief election official. It's so great to hear everybody talk about the critical importance of voting. And I have a broad perspective on suffrage, having been in many different component pieces of this. I was a poll worker, I was a civil rights and voting rights attorney. I was a candidate for office, and now serving as Secretary of State, overseeing elections in the Commonwealth. all while also being the mother of a daughter, sums up what suffrage means to me. I have learned so much from these life experiences and highly encourage all women not only to vote, but also to become involved in civic affairs. Consider running for office. The more we run, the more we win. We need more women in office. We need more women in leadership. Governor Wolf has been a leader in making sure that we have extensive representation of women. And this is important not only because we are highly effective as leaders, but also as role models for our daughters and for our granddaughters. When women become involved in civic life, they pay homage to the suffragists who set those foundations for us. The 19th Amendment not only gave women access to the polling booth, but it also led to today's ability and acceptance of women in all positions of leadership and public life, including elected and appointed service, such as the women here today, on the local, state, and national levels. Without you, without suffrage, all that followed for women would not have been possible. So thank you again for all you did to lay the foundation for all of us.
This has been a fascinating discussion, and I would like to thank all of our participants, but especially CARRIE, CHAPMAN, CATT, who traveled the farthest from more than a century ago to join us here. And I would like to remind everyone that the best way to celebrate the centennial of women's suffrage and to honor those who fought so very hard for the vote is to treasure your right to vote and to exercise that right in every election. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell, and you are all amazing.